Welcome to Trevor White Sailing. Today I'm going to talk about water tanks. So my last chat I talked about water makers and having problems with water makers and having to rely on my water tanks. Today I was going to talk about the importance of keeping your water tanks clean. A lot of people give it lip service, but it is something you have to pay particular attention to, particularly when you're cruising in places like the Pacific, or places in Asia where the water quality isn't always as good as it is at home. Like typically, I'm Australian. Australia and New Zealand has very high quality tap water, drinking water, and you can expect that you won't get sick drinking the tap water generally. It's not always the case when you're travelling. You know, a lot of the countries you go to, the drinking water or tap water is not potable or barely potable, or it needs to be filtered or boiled, and or it may have heavy minerals in it as well. So the considerations. And the other thing I find is I'm often filling up my spare water tanks with town water or marina water, and it's only in those that I really notice bacteria growing. You know, they're on the deck, so they're getting sunshine, bacteria's growing, all of those aspects. So I do find that I'm cleaning those tanks a bit more regularly than I'm cleaning my main tank. And I haven't been sick for a while from my water tanks. I mean, I did get sick, really sick once before, having a contaminated water tank with diesel, which I talked about in the last video. But I find you do meet people who get sick from their water tanks, and I think it's really just laziness. You know, you've got to, like all parts of a boat, you have to maintain it. And if you're using it regularly, it's not such a big deal. I tend to sail and then put the boat up on the hard, leave for a period, go and do some land-based activities, come back to the boat and sail again. So I do leave it for a period of time, and I like sailing like that. You know, it gives you a break from sailing, allows you to go and do other things. But you know, your boat has been sitting idle. You've got potentially bacteria in the tank. I tend to try and dose my tanks before I leave the boat, and it's either bleach, chlorine, or hydrogen peroxide. So, and everybody's got their opinion on those. Some are safer than others. Some potentially could be working against the chemical composition in your tanks. What I normally do is when I get back to the boat and I'm making it ready to go back in the water, I have a procedure for cleaning my tanks. So what I do, and I do this religiously, is I try and leave the tanks full. I then empty a bit of water out so I can access the inspection port on the tank. I will get a hose and I'll run that hose, freshwater hose, into the tank, and I will agitate the inside of the tank and try and move any sediments or bacteria, well, maybe not bacteria, but any sediment or growths that are inside the tank. I'll then flush that tank using my pump, and what I'm doing is I'm also checking the freshwater system, that everything works, and I'm running all that shitty water that's maybe in the tank through my filters, and I'm getting rid of it over the side. Now, once that's completely pumped out, I then fill that tank with clean fresh water. I then dose the tank. So in the past, I've used bleach, I've used hydrogen peroxide, I've used chlorine dioxide. I typically buy what's available to me. I think it's probably hydrogen peroxide or chlorine dioxide, which is the safer options. I think chlorine is probably the most economical option. We tend to have it in our drinking water anyway. But in the past, in the islands, I've used bleach because that's all I could get hold of. And in my case, I normally put about 3 or 4 caps of bleach, straight cleaning bleach into the tank. I let it sit there for 30 minutes. I might agitate it a bit, and then I'll pump it completely overside, wash the tank again, pump it overside, and then I'll fill the tank. And it's the same procedure if I'm using chlorine dioxide or I'm using hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is about a litre per 100 litres, and the chlorine's about 5 mils per 100 litres. So you just got to work out what's suitable for you or what chemicals are available. A lot of people don't like bleach, but I've used it. It just goes in the cocktail of chemicals that we're all exposed to. So that's how I clean out my tanks. When I'm filling my tanks up, what I use is a water filter that is used in caravans. So I buy it from Bunnings. It's a carbon filter. It just has hose connections on it. They're about $25 to $50 depending on where you buy them. And I use it for a season. So I get one season out of it, and I figured by then it's done enough work. Could probably get a lot more out of it, I believe, but that's how I fill my tank. Anytime I'm taking water from a marina or from a public wharf or a fuel dock, I put that connection on if I can. Not all hoses allow for it, but I try and use that connection and that filter, and it slows down the filling of my tank a little bit, but I'm filtering all the sediment and all the bacteria, viruses, other things that a carbon filter will filter out as best I can. So that's my first pass at trying to keep my water tanks clean and free from bacteria. Now that doesn't always happen when you're in the island. Sometimes you get quite thick hoses which don't correspond with your the hose you carry on board. You don't have time to do a jury rig, and you've just got to fill up your tanks. You're in a busy fuel dock. People are impatient, so you take on water where you can. But if you can filter it, I would recommend it, because there are quite a few nasties up there at times. And the other problem is when I'm filling from my jerry cans. If I'm taking water from other sources, ideally it's rainwater or some sort of filtered water. But again, it's not always possible. But if I go into a source and I fill up my jerry cans, I take that carbon filter and my own hose and try and fill up my water tanks by filtering it first. And with my water tanks on the deck, what I'll do with those is I typically, before I fill them up, I'll put some bleach in them and swash it around, leave it in there for a few hours to fester. And then before I fill those tanks, I'll empty it out, flush them out a couple of times so they're free from any bleach. And that way I know there's no bacteria in those tanks and it's just been recently dosed. Once I've got the water in the tanks, I'm pretty happy once I've done that process. It's typically at the start of every season I do this. I have a sediment filter as the water leaves the tank, getting pumped up towards my freshwater pump and the taps, and I have a finer sediment filter. So one's like a mesh filter, the other one's like a paper filter. And I use a 5 micron filter. I've tried using carbon filters, and I find that they just put a lot of stress on my water pumps, slows everything down. So because I'm putting the water pump at the front end, where I've got tap pressure, then inside the boat I'm using a 5 micron paper filter or whatever I can get available. And sometimes you can get 5 or 10 micron particle carbon filters, chlorine filters, and you can put those in as well. But that allows me to filter the water inside the boat from the tanks, and any impurities in the tanks are being filtered out. So that's how I keep the tanks inside of Tintin clean. My tanks are aluminium, and I can't get right into those tanks. They're sealed apart from one inspection hatch, which is suitable for a small camera. And at some point I'm going to have to open those tanks up and give them a really good inspection and put another port on. But that's how I do it, and I only have 300 litres in my tank, and that's why I like to have a water maker as well. But if you don't clean your tanks, it's something to consider, particularly if you're buying a new boat. Buying a new boat, you want to definitely dose the tanks, dump the tanks, fill them and empty them a couple of times so you've got good clean water. It also gives you a chance when you're dumping the water that's been used as sterilisation with the bleach or chlorine, to run it through all your lines. I do that religiously. I run it through all my lines, shower lines, head lines, kitchen lines, so that I'm sterilising all those lines, cleaning it out with a bit of disinfectant, and I know that there's no bugs in there and it's good for the start of the season. So that's, and also that my pumps are good, and other fittings and fixtures are working. They're not going to fail. I mean, you know, fittings and fixtures when you've been leaving them for a while fail. Pumps religiously fail when you've been leaving them for a while. But if you use them regularly, they tend to last okay. So short and sharp. That's pretty much, you know, water tanks, and that's what I do. I've been doing it every year for a long time, and after I had a bad experience, of course. And I recommend it if you're, you know, in the Pacific and you're going to all these little countries which don't have the same water standards. Probably the same in South America and definitely the same in Asia. You know, a lot of the water in Asia is pretty average, and you can't always rely on it to be safe. And you definitely want to be filtering. And places like, you know, some parts of Southeast Asia, you know, they have Guardia. I would be filtering it with a lot more carbon filters before I put it in the tank to try and clean it up. And then I would probably also be running a UV filter. I don't run a UV filter because I don't want to have the electric draw. I think they run at about, you know, 10 to 20 watts. If you forget about that's on, you know, you've got this drain on your batteries. But before I go into Asia, I'll probably add a UV filter, and that will help to kill any bacteria in the water before I drink it. And I'll put that on my drinking water line. I have had one before, I just haven't put it on one on Tintin. So yeah, just considerations. You know, leave your thoughts about how you do it, or, you know, comments about how you do it. If you like this content, give us a thumbs up. If you have any other ideas on water filtration on a boat, always keen to know. Other chemicals or processes that you find useful. I know some people have UV lights in tanks. I think that's getting a bit excessive, but you know, technology is changing all the time, and I'm always keen to find new ways of doing things. Thanks very much. See you next time.